Tom, I guess we might have started off with the latest Nanos poll, which now shows, so we've gone, I think, from majority to minority, but that's apparently what the latest poll shows, a Liberal minority government possible. What's going on here?
Well, I think that at this stage of the game, everybody's just waiting to see what happens in the debates next week to make up their definitive opinion about this. For a campaign that started off, a few months back with the Conservatives with a prohibitive lead, it's turned into a really interesting race. When they say a minority government that could really cover a very wide swath, I don't think that there's much in the polls that would actually indicate that. I think the polls clearly indicate that at this stage anyway, because it's all imaginary football at this stage, there's not a single vote that's been cast. But at this stage of the game, if the numbers were to hold, we're not just looking at a Liberal minority, we're looking at a Liberal majority for two main reasons. One is the efficiency of the vote, and the other one is the potential pool of voters. So not only are the Liberals ahead of the Conservatives, but even when they were behind the Conservatives, they lost the vote, Aaron, in 2019 and 2021, but still formed government. So this time around, they're actually scheduled, according to every poll, to get more votes than the Conservatives, which would mean a majority situation. And why do I say that? The first thing is the efficiency. The Liberal vote is not as concentrated as the Conservative vote, and that's good, because the Conservative vote means that they're concentrated in provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they get 60% of the vote. You know what, Aaron? If you win a seat by 20,000 votes in Saskatchewan or Alberta, it's still one seat. The Liberals have a grasp on almost every seat in the Greater Toronto Area. That's, depending on who's doing the counting, that's some 50, 55 seats. Actually, more in that case, more seats than there are in Alberta and Saskatchewan combined. And those are going to be seats that they'll win by just a few thousand votes, so it's more efficient. It produces more seats. The other thing is their pool of potential voters. And what does that mean? That means that the possibility for somebody in the Green Party or the NDP, if they don't get their first choice, who are they going to go to? They're not going to go to the Conservatives in most cases anyway. Very few of them, I would say, because they're progressive voters. Most of them would turn their vote over to the Liberals. So those are the two reasons why I dispute the idea that these numbers anywhere across Canada are showing minority. But Nick Nanos is a smart guy, and he's, of course, entitled to his own opinion.
Tom, what do you make of this whole deal where they're now calling into question specifically Conservative voters or supporters, the polls in general at all?
It's very healthy in a democracy to come up with your own theories, and I think that the Conservatives are absolutely allowed to say we've had these big rallies. That's proof that we're doing better than what the polls show. But a rally of 15,000 people, that might be 10,000, that might be 8,000 in Edmonton, Alberta, is just bringing together your troops in an area where you have 60% of the vote, as I just mentioned. So I don't think that there's any indication that there's skullduggery on the part of the polling companies, because there are far too many of them. And there's another factor that people don't think about. It doesn't matter what polling company they are. They don't make their living doing political polls. They do public opinion sampling. They do, for private companies. They test markets. They do things that bring in cash. If they were to be consistently off in their polling, skewing the results one way or another, I think they'd get called on it by their main clients, the big corporations that pay them to do polling to find out what people's tastes are, what their inclinations are. So I don't adhere. I mean, there are tons of, conspiracy theories out there, and this is just another one of them. I guess it's a way of reassuring yourself. You're a Conservative, you're a bit frustrated, you were 28 or 27 points ahead, and all of a sudden you're being told that it's the Liberals who are going to form a government. It's frustrating. So they're telling their folks, don't believe the polls, which is another way of saying keep fighting, and nobody can blame them for that.
By the way, I don't know if you heard, James Meny actually told me this. At some point today, there was actually an official count done of the numbers of people at that rally. Did you hear this story?
Yeah.
It wasn't 10 or 12,000. It was, 15 to 1,700. That's what the count was.
Yeah, so this is the thing about counting crowds. I don't know if your memory stretches back to the famous rally for Canada in the 1995 referendum. I mean, Federalists were being driven up the wall because there was one guy that I knew to be a dyed-in-the-wool separatist at Radio-Canada who, looking at the crowd, said, oh, yeah, well, there are perhaps thousands of people here today. Anybody who was there who saw the thing is going to say, that was hundreds of thousands of people. But you're not allowed to say that because Radio-Canada was downplaying it because there was one guy who was a separatist. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a mugs game because, what do? You use a laser pointer to start counting them. What's the actual technique? And so fair enough. let everybody come in with their own idea. But at the end of the day, the only thing that is counted for real is the number of votes in the ballot box.
I think they could have called Donald Trump and asked him to perhaps estimate the size of the crowd.
Yes,
that might have been accurate.
He's very reliable.
He is. He's good with that.
Size. Yeah.
All right, let me move on and talk about Mark Carney. There is some controversy today. We've had Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu react, calling Mark Carney to clarify something that came up at a rally. So, Tom, can you just contextualize this?
So, Mr. Carney's at a rally. A bunch of people in the crowd, not unexpectedly, because it happens often, somebody who would call themselves a pro-Palestinian activist, there are other words, throws a question at him from a crowd of hundreds, if not thousands of people. Mr. Carney acknowledges and understands.
Okay, well, let me. The quote was this: "There's a genocide happening in Palestine." That was yelled out by a protester.
Right, and here's the context: that you're in front of hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and all you hear is Gaza, or all you hear is Palestine, or all you hear is one word. You get the subject, and that's exactly what Mr. Carney was able to say. He said, "Hold on." After this, people were saying, "Oh, well, he used the word genocide, and your only answer was to say that Canada has a ban on exporting weapons to Israel," which was enough to send several, lots of people up the wall saying, "Hold on, this is terrible because you're acknowledging that this might be a genocide." I don't think that any fair reading of that situation could lead to that conclusion. Any fair reading, anybody who's ever been in a crowd and had questions pitched at him, it's already admirable that the person caught the subject, even vaguely, and was able to respond something based on Canadian foreign policy. Now, you can agree or disagree with that foreign policy, and there's a lot to debate in that foreign policy. But to go from there to try to somehow ascribe the word in that protester's mouth in a massive crowd to Mark Carney is a stretch that's just unbelievable, because I've been in that type of crowd. I know what this is like firsthand. And it's grossly unfair to try to tack that word onto Mark Carney, but some people are trying to do it. Indeed, the Israeli Prime Minister has called for clarification. Well, we've been through enough cases of foreign leaders trying to stick their nose in our politics. Thank you. Let Canadians deal with this one. Thank you, Mr. Netanyahu, for your opinion on this. And by the way, for anybody who's interested, my own position on this conflict is very well known, and I am a consistent supporter of Israel and always have been. So anybody who thinks that I'm trying to downplay something that is unseemly should look at my record on this. But I'm simply saying, for having been somebody with that type of crowd, with somebody whipping something at you, having to somehow have to deal with that as if it was something that you ignored or agreed with when somebody uses that type of word, that's not fair. And I'm going to call it out for that.
Carney later, by the way, he emphasized that he would not politicize the term genocide. Right? He actually said that, and then noted Canada's balanced stance on humanitarian concerns and Israel's security. So I'm not sure why the Israeli Prime Minister, as you just said, felt the need to kind of stick his nose in this. Well, I'm curious what you think happens going forward.
There are people who feel, including friends of mine, who feel so strongly about the issue generally that they're going to pounce on this, and I get it. Nerves are frayed. It's been a horrible time. There are hostages still being held after that horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on Israeli citizens and on October 7th, and I understand. The reaction of people who are saying if there's any chance that anybody did agree with the use of that word without any determination of that by the appropriate international body, then that's not on, and I get that. But at the same time, don't ascribe to somebody something that is said by a person who pitches something at him in the crowd. And by the way, we talked at the beginning of our talk today about the debates that are coming up next week, and that's a much better forum to be able to get to the bottom of this type of discussion.
I want to ask one last thing before I let you go, just to go back to the Conservatives for a second. And I think the story first came up, and I saw someone from the Conservatives today as well on one of the CTV shows. There seems to be a bit of a split within the party itself as to what the approach should be by Pierre Poilievre going forward. And I think he went out of his way to speech today to say, they're telling me not to do this. Here's what I am going to do. They're telling me not to talk about this, but I am going to talk about it.
Right.
Typically, that's not good for a party.
No, but it's clever politics. So what Poilievre was doing was, it was a judo hip flip with what he had been put through, the grinder he was being put through by people like Corey Tonight, who is a highly respected conservative organizer who just ran the hugely successful election campaign of Doug Ford in Ontario. And he was saying that this was a case of electoral organizational malpractice by the Conservatives of Pierre Poilievre, saying, look, you've blown it so totally that you started with a 28% lead, and now you're 4-6% behind in the polls. It's unbelievable how bad your campaign has been. So what Poilievre did is called a rhetorical trick. He sets up a straw man to knock it down. He says, "Oh, they're telling me not to talk about the single mom who has to go to a food bank. They're telling me not to talk about drugs and crime in the streets. They're telling me not to talk," which is all baloney, of course. Nobody's telling him that. But it's his way of saying, I'm going to continue being myself. Now, it's actually a strong way of reacting. It's a good rhetorical trick. But when people look at it, they're sort of going, but that's not what they're saying. They're saying you're running a lousy campaign. And they're not telling you not to talk about things that are important to people. They're saying that look, the number one problem with this campaign is from the day Carney called the election, the Monday at noon, Pierre Poilievre was in front of the cameras with a heated personal attack against Mark Carney. Now, you can be extremely frustrated that Mark Carney has come along and changed the political landscape. You can think that the Liberals don't deserve a fourth kick at the can. All that's fair ball. But if this becomes you trying to knock down, Mark Carney, the way Poilievre was doing it this week, saying he's got a fake curriculum vitae and he's got these bogus job titles. No, they're not bogus. He really was the governor of the Bank of Canada, and he really was the governor of the Bank of England. Oh, and he really does have a PhD in economics from Oxford and a master's from Harvard, and that's not phony. Those are actually real degrees. Oh, and yes, he was the chairman of the board of a $1 trillion company, and he's worked on climate change at the United Nations. So it's frustrating for Poilievre. He's trying to attack a guy who's got that rich a curriculum vitae. And on Pierre Poilievre's curriculum vitae, what have you got? Politician. And so it's a very tough comparison when you look at it. And you can, if you don't like Carney, you don't like the Liberals, vote for somebody else. But don't try to say that Mark Carney doesn't have the ability, the experience, and the expertise that he has. You know why? Because he does.
Tom, are we sure that Mark Carney didn't get those certificates, those degrees, mail order? Like, just go online and send away?
Well, I know that Pierre Poilievre would have you believe they came out of a Cracker Jack box, but actually he's got them.
Just checking.